Welcome you to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on an essential journey about deeply complex and, well, rapidly evolving situation. Israel's deepening isolation, a nation divided. Wow, we've pulled together quite a stack of sources, articles, in-depth research, expert commentary. The idea is to offer you a kind of comprehensive shortcut to understanding the profound internal and external pressures currently reshaping Israel. Our mission today really is to cut through the noise, illuminate the nuanced layers of this narrative, and help you grasp what's truly at stake.
Yeah, it really is a crucial moment. It's like a snapshot, isn't it? A nation facing immense global scrutiny and some very profound internal questions. We're going to be examining the shifting attitudes both outside and, importantly, inside Israel, and exploring the underlying reasons for this critical juncture, drawing directly from the diverse perspectives our sources have provided. It's a story of intersecting pressures, and it impacts far more than just Israel itself.
Okay, let's unpack this then. There's a scene that really sets the stage. Picture late July in Jerusalem. Families of the hostages, taken by Hamas back on October 7, 2023. They're gathering near the prime minister's office. You can almost feel the weight of their desperation. They wore those heartbreaking yellow ribbons, carried placards, emblazoned with the faces of their loved ones still held captive. Their urgent plea wasn't just for their families. It was a desperate call. A call for the authorities to reconsider expanding military operations in Gaza and instead to, make a deal with Hamas for the release of captives and a definitive end to the war.
And here's where it gets really interesting, as you said. Many of these families have publicly accused Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving prime minister, of prolonging the conflict for his own political purposes.
That's a powerful accusation, isn't it? Especially coming from those most directly affected.
It's an incredibly potent accusation, absolutely. And it speaks directly to this fascinating, somewhat cynical, internal political calculation that's going on.
Yeah.
Our sources reveal that Netanyahu relies heavily on ultranationalist ministers who openly advocate for settling Gaza with Jews. For many of them, this isn't just about security, you see. It touches on deeply held religious, ideological beliefs about territory. And these ministers, they've explicitly threatened to quit its coalition if any agreement is reached to end the war, which could immediately lead to the collapse of the government.
Right.
So what you have is this intense pressure from the streets, from the hostage families, clashing directly with the immediate political survival of the prime minister. It raises a really important question. How do these internal political demands, this need to keep a fragile coalition together, how does that influence the nation's broader strategy, especially when faced with such desperate pleas from its own citizens?
Yeah, it seems to put him in an impossible bind.
Almost. Or at least a very, very difficult one.
Absolutely. And, it's a bind of his own making in some ways. And the pressures on Netanyahu aren't just from his coalition partners, are they? He's also, quite notably, blocked a state inquiry into the security failures that led up to those devastating Hamas attacks. An inquiry that would undoubtedly include scrutiny of his own role. Plus, we can't forget his long-running corruption trial. He denies the charges, of course, but it could ultimately lead to a jail sentence. So you can really see how these deeply personal domestic issues create an incredibly complicated, almost suffocating backdrop for any major decisions he makes about the conflict. It's not just about national interests. It's intricately woven with his personal and political future.
And as you rightly point out, these domestic challenges are unfolding against this backdrop of escalating global outrage. It's a potent combination. If we connect this to the bigger picture, our sources really highlight the devastating humanitarian toll in Gaza. After almost 2 years of conflict, local health officials report that more than 63,000 Palestinians have been killed, and much of Gaza now lies in ruins. The sheer scale of destruction is, almost incomprehensible. This hunger crisis, too, has significantly deepened Israel's isolation. You have aid agencies, even some of Israel's closest allies, now openly blaming Israeli policies for the worsening situation. Israel, for its part, maintains these claims are exaggerated, based on what they call Hamas lies. They deny responsibility for the broader humanitarian disaster.
And crucially, it's worth noting, isn't it, that Israel has continued to bar foreign journalists from entering Gaza independently, which of course makes it incredibly challenging to verify claims from either side.
Exactly. That lack of independent reporting becomes particularly significant when we consider external assessments. Last month, for instance, a UN-backed panel of experts confirmed famine in parts of the territory. And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called it a man-made crisis. Very strong words. Adding to the mounting international pressure, you have an increasing number of human rights groups, scholars, arguing that Israel's actions in Gaza amount to genocide. Now, that's a claim Israel strongly rejects. They call it baseless, politically motivated.
So the humanitarian and political pressures are undeniable. But what about public sentiment? When we look at public opinion, the numbers are stark. They really underscore this deepening isolation. Gallup polling, they've tracked this for 25 years, meticulously reveals only 46% of the American public now supports Israel. That's the lowest proportion ever recorded in their history. Meanwhile, a third of respondents express sympathy with the Palestinians. That's the highest reading ever. What do you make of those numbers, seeing such a dramatic shift, in a relatively short period?
It's truly profound shift. And it's not just confined to the United States. A Pew Research poll published back in June, even before the Gaza crisis escalated further, found something similar. In 20 out of 24 countries surveyed, around half of adults, or even more, had an unfavorable view of Israel, including in the U.S. So this suggests a significant, widespread shift in international perception. It's reaching far beyond America, truly global proportions. Although our sources do provide an important counterpoint here. They note that in some places there's also been a worrying rise in anti-Semitism, including attacks on Jews and Israeli-linked targets, particularly in Europe. So it's complex. It highlights the multifaceted nature of the global reaction. It's not simple.
That's a critical point to consider, absolutely. And digging a little deeper into those shifts, even historically supportive groups seem to be showing cracks. Hugh Lovett, a respected Middle East expert, he cited discontent within the Magi movement backing Donald Trump. The Financial Times reported a rather startling moment. Trump himself told a prominent Jewish donor, and I quote, "My people are starting to hate Israel." Now, while Trump remains a staunch ally and his support is crucial for billions in U.S. military assistance, that comment really indicates a potential shift in a truly vital constituency, doesn't it?
That does.
It's not just a statistic. It points to a broader change in how different political segments, even those traditionally seen as unwavering, are perhaps beginning to perceive the conflict. Makes you wonder how deep that shift goes within that base.
Indeed. And if we consider the global implications, this hardening global attitude, it has concrete consequences. We're already seeing countries, the UK included, pledging to recognize Palestinian statehood, a move met with, fury from Israel. Beyond rhetoric, calls for sanctions, arms embargoes, boycotts, they're intensifying. These aren't just abstract pressures, These represent tangible diplomatic and economic actions being considered or enacted with real-world impact. We're talking potentially significant limitations on military aid, economic penalties, and a growing cultural isolation that can deeply affect a nation. Which raises an important question. Are these mounting international pressures actually shifting Israeli policy? Or are they largely being dismissed, or maybe even hardening resolve internally?
That's precisely what our next segment explores. So yeah, what does this all mean for Israelis themselves? Our sources give us a fascinating look at the differing opinions within Israeli society, which often follow what are described as old dividing lines. Progressives may be leaning towards self-criticism, conservatives often on the defensive. We hear from Esther, for instance. She's 31, a religious Jew. She feels this profound sense of resignation, almost. Believes Israel will always be condemned, stating quite starkly, everybody likes to hate Israel. She even goes so far as to believe it's good for Western politicians to criticize Israel for public perception, almost like it's an expected routine condemnation that plays into some larger, unchangeable narrative. It's a rather fatalistic perspective, wouldn't you say?
It is, yes. And her sentiment is very much echoed by Shalom, a 73-year-old ultra-Orthodox Jew. He defiantly says, "I think we shouldn't pay attention to the world. Nations will always look at us negatively." He even cites a specific example of this perceived bias. He says, when a missile falls by mistake and kills a Palestinian, the whole world says, child murderers. This perspective suggests a really deep-seated belief in an inherent, almost existential anti-Israel bias. Regardless of specific actions, it reinforces a profound sense of siege, a feeling that they're constantly being unfairly judged by the international community. Do you think this perspective, which seems common among certain groups, makes it even harder for Israel to truly engage with or respond to global criticism?
It certainly seems like it would. Creates an internal echo chamber, perhaps. But then you have Yuan. He's 21, a secular Jew, and he offers a really contrasting view. He challenges that whole world hates us narrative, calls it a classic anti-Semitism accusation, suggests it's not really the case, especially given the significant international support Israel had at the start of the war. And he observes a tangible change that really hits home. I don't see any tourists here. It feels like we're becoming a more closed society. What's striking about Yoan's perspective is he's not just dismissing the criticism as anti-Semitism. He acknowledges a real-world impact, a sense of growing isolation impacting daily life. He's an Israeli challenging an Israeli narrative, which is the powerful internal dissonance.
That dissonance is absolutely crucial, and it highlights a deeply fractured internal dialogue within Israel. Hugh Lovett, the expert we heard from earlier, He describes the Israeli government's reaction to criticism as a well-known playbook, consistently smearing anything critical of Israel and the war in Gaza as anti-Semitic. However, he suggests the sheer regularity of these accusations might finally be blunting their effectiveness. It's a strategy that, maybe through overuse, is losing its power to silence or deflect genuine concerns. This raises another important question. If that tactic is becoming less effective, what does that mean for the government's ability to control the narrative, both domestically and internationally in the long run?
That's a fascinating point. And what further complicates this internal dialogue is that you might also find it striking how Israeli television largely ignores the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. The rhetoric often remains aggressive. Critical voices, whether from inside or abroad, are frequently attacked or silenced. Imagine the impact of a largely one-sided media landscape on public perception, on the broader understanding of the conflict's toll. It creates a really challenging environment for any sort of self-reflection or a broader understanding of the conflict's impact. It further isolates, perhaps, a segment of the Israeli population from the global narrative.
Yet, despite these internal narratives and media approaches, perceptions do appear to be subtly but significantly changing on the ground, within Israel itself. A poll by the Israeli Democracy Institute carried out just last month suggested that about 2/3 of the public now support a deal with Hamas and an end to the war, with overwhelming support on the left and a more divided right.
That is a truly significant shift, isn't it? Especially given those earlier sentiments we heard from Esther and Shalom about not paying attention to the world. It hints at a growing internal consensus that perhaps the current path is, well, unsustainable.
It's an undeniable shift, yes. And this data becomes even more significant when you see it alongside the increasing number of people joining protests calling for an end to the war. And these aren't just calls for the release of hostages anymore. Increasingly, they seem driven by concerns over the casualties in Gaza. Some of these protesters have even displayed pictures of Palestinian children killed by the Israeli military, indicating a growing internal acknowledgement of the humanitarian crisis, a more direct response to the suffering. This is a visible, on-the-ground manifestation of that changing public sentiment. It shows the polls are translating into real-world action, a visible pushback against the government's approach.
Mikal Hatul-Radoshitzli, a senior advisor at Mind Israel, offers a crucial insight into the Israeli psyche here, one that helps us understand the foundation of many of these reactions. She says, "The Israeli collective psyche is very much consumed by our own trauma from October 7th. And that provides such vital context, doesn't it, for understanding current reactions, the deep emotional toll on the nation. It's not just a political conflict for many, it's deeply personal, deeply painful."
That's an incredibly important point. It really helps us understand the emotional landscape. But crucially, she adds that Israelis are very much aware of the negative perception of Israel around the world, which points to this complex internal struggle, balancing profound national trauma with an acute awareness of global condemnation. It's not a simple case of just ignoring outside perspectives. It's a deeply felt internal conflict. Imagine trying to reconcile those two incredibly powerful, almost contradictory realities simultaneously. How do you think a nation grapples with global condemnation while still reeling from its own deep wound? It creates this profound psychological tension.
Exactly. It's a tension with enormous implications. And here's where it gets really interesting for the long term. Hatul-Radoshitzli also highlights what appears to be a global generational shift. She observes that younger people around the world increasingly tend to have anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian views, and she openly questions whether Israeli authorities truly understand the potential impact, the significance of this trend. It suggests a fundamental change in how the conflict is viewed by an entire rising demographic.
And Hugh Lovett reinforces this. He states he has no doubt that the war in Gaza will profoundly influence future policy in the West, as the newer generation comes of political age. The longer the conflict continues, he told our sources, the more these tectonic shifts become permanent. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about fundamental, perhaps irreversible changes in geopolitical alignments, public sentiment, diplomatic approaches. These aren't just temporary headlines. They're deep structural shifts, which raises again that important question. Without an overarching strategy, without a clear political horizon, essentially, a long-term vision for some kind of resolution or future governance, where is all this leading? The entire situation, Hatul-Radoshitzli notes, simply seems unsustainable.
So we've unpacked quite a complex tapestry today. Israel's deepening isolation, from the desperate pleas of hostage families, the intricate political pressures on its leadership, to the stark shifts in global opinions and those profound internal divides within Israeli society itself. We've heard about how the collective trauma of October 7th continues to shape reactions, even as awareness of global condemnation grows.
Yeah, we've seen how internal politics really intertwine with international pressures, and how vastly differing perspectives exist even within Israel regarding its global standing, its future. We've heard critical polling data, powerful personal testimonies, and some piercing observations from experts on both the immediate impacts and these long-term generational shifts that seem to be fundamentally reshaping the world's view.
The convergence of a traumatized society, a hardening international stance, and this global generational shift. It raises truly profound questions about the path ahead for Israel and for the wider region. It points to a critical need for a new direction, perhaps, a political horizon, as our sources put it, especially if the current situation is, as they suggest, truly unsustainable.
Absolutely.
So for you listening, what stands out most from this deep dive? How might these intensifying internal and external pressures ultimately reshape the region? And what will the long-term implications truly be of these tectonic shifts for global diplomacy, for public opinion? Something to consider, perhaps, as you reflect on what we've explored today.